I'm Melissa Davis, the Family Services Coordinator at the IFOPA, and I'm really excited to be here with Illene, who is the content creator at Caregiver Chronicles, an Instagram account that focuses on caregiving tips and tricks and self-care for caregivers. And we're really excited to talk about caregiving, hiring a caregiver, and working with a caregiver. So I'm going to let Illene introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her and her background.
Hi, my name is Eileen, and I grew up in the Pacific, or not, I live in the Pacific Northwest now. I grew up in central Kansas. And when we moved to Oregon, I have a background in athletic training. I've worked in a dental office, I've worked in an office setting. But when I moved out here, my mother-in-law was involved in caregiving, and she knew there was a new program started through the state, which is nice here because they do backgrounds, fingerprint, and required training. So it just gives a little added security for the families. And so I started with that program, but I really found I could use my skills through the medical field. I actually did my EMT and my intermediate while I was in high school and college. And so I had that skill and that knowledge, and I could customize things through athletic training and sports medicine and really meet the needs of the clients I worked with. And I started through the state as a caregiver, and then that slowly just progressed and changed into the private caregiving field. And so I've helped my clients with interviewing and training, and navigating the changes of their caregiving needs. What we started at day one might have looked a lot different, 8 years later, and that type of thing. So navigating the changes and helping them through the different things they were going through, just supporting them through those changes.
That's awesome. And how did you kind of make the leap into Instagram and kind of sharing your knowledge with the community?
It really started as a way to remind caregivers to care for themselves. One, diet, nutrition, exercise. It's so hard to take the time to stop and care for yourselves. But if you are run down and exhausted and tired yourself, it's hard to give the person you're caring for the best version of you, as you're trying to manage their care, because it's so easy to forget to take care of yourself. And so I just wanted to include some of those tips and tricks, to remind caregivers of the importance of caring for themselves, but also share little tips and tricks. Because a lot of the things I learned, I don't have a CNA, I don't have an LPN or an RN, I don't have any certifications in actual caregiving, athletic training, sports medicine, those things all come together. But if you're a CNA, you have a class you went through, you're working in a facility, you have the backup. If you're a family member, you might have got, something changed, something happened, and you got thrown into caregiving, and you're learning as you go, and you can advocate the best for that person you're caring for. But you might not have a wide range of skills that you already have baseline to be able to modify and customize from. So if a tip I share helps one person, that's awesome. Maybe it'll help more than one person. Learning how to use a lift for safety. How can I safely insert that and get my person in it so that they're comfortable and safe? And how can we use it the most? I had a client their husband was doing all the 100%, all their transfers when I started, and she was taller than him. But they were worried about safety, and he did all the transfers. Well, he later developed scoliosis. If we hadn't have got a lift in and started doing 100% of the transfers with the lift, what would we have done? What would her care have looked like at a facility versus at home with customized care with using the sling and the lift for all the transfers? It saved his health and prolonged his health. It made it so we could safely transfer her ourselves without him being relied upon as the only person to be able to do the transfers. So just in little situations like that, you have to think outside the box or find other ways to do things safely, because what works for one person might not work for another. Like if you're sitting on the right-hand side of the bed and you have one side that's weak, what if you sat on the other side? Or getting in and out of the car, if you got in and out of the passenger side versus the driver's side back seat, would that allow your strong side to help more versus your weak side being where it can't help and you're kind of stuck? So learning how to use different tips and tricks and customize things with maybe something you already have on hand, before you buy a new piece of equipment. or finding someone you can borrow it from to try it out and see if it would work for you before you put the cost into that. Um, Utilizing what you have before you start, throwing the bus at it and putting all these new things in play that you're uncomfortable with or don't know how to use. So just helping learn how to use equipment or what you might be able to use in different ways than you might have been intended, but if you can still use it safely, then that's great.
And I think that that really flows into a great point about how paid caregivers can work with family caregivers and come up with those ideas to, create a safe environment for not only the person, who's needing the care, but also their family who, is providing care on the off hours.
Definitely. And when I come into a home to help them, I don't want to rewrite the script. If you're doing things that work for you and you're doing them safely and you're comfortable with them, that's golden. Let's, if there's something safety wise that I'm like, ooh, that's a red flag. We need to look at that. That's one thing. But I always want to do it the way works for them and they're most comfortable with. Versus, well, this is the way I was told to do it, or this is the only way I know how. So really customizing it to what they need, versus just trying to change up the whole plan.
Yeah. And you guys are a team. I think, most people with FOP, they start out with their family members or their parent as their primary caregiver. Some people, as they move into adulthood, their spouse becomes their primary caregiver. So hiring a paid caregiver is a big and different step for most people with FOP. Can you talk a little bit about how to find a caregiver, when you're ready to add that person to your care team?
Great. Yeah. One thing we've used newspaper, putting ad in the newspaper in the wanted section. Social media with Facebook. A lot of towns have like a local job page, or sometimes the caregivers, have a page where they can share information with other caregivers. So Facebook, social media is a great way. Nextdoor is another great way to put an ad out looking for a caregiver. You're going to find people local to you. And if you're in a small town, that's not a big worry. But if you're in a larger town, someone that's close to you that will have less commute or less difficulties in getting to town, getting to work on time, or those type of things are helpful. Another one, Indeed, you can kind of put an ad on. Care.com. Those are other places that you can put an ad of the word out besides the newspaper, but also word of mouth and referral. If you have a medical social worker you're working with, or if you have a friend across town that you know has a caregiver, see if they know of somebody. They might not have availability right now, but what if they have a client pass away or a situation change? They might have some availability coming open. And if they don't know somebody, they might have a friend that might know of somebody. So sometimes referral and word of mouth is one of the best ways to find caregivers.
Absolutely. One thing I know that additionally people in the FOP community have done is that they have a local college in their area, reaching out to nursing programs and seeing if,
Yes.
ladies who are in nursing school or a medically based program are interested in caregiving hours. That's been really successful for several people in our community.
Great.
Yeah. So you've put your ad out, you've got some interest. What can you tell me a little bit about like interviewing caregivers? What sort of questions to ask if you've never hired a caregiver, never had anyone come into your home, and are used to just having your spouse or your parent do the care for you?
Yeah, one thing we like to do is sometimes I will, so I'm going to do some of the background work first for my client. If it's, you're looking for someone for your husband or your child, you're going to know their likes and dislikes. Getting references that you can call and check is always something you can do beforehand. With social media, you can kind of do a little snooping and see what they look like or what they post. If you are very sensitive to smoking versus non-smoking, that is something good to ask beforehand. If you have pets, you want to make sure if they're not allergic to anything or if they have issues with a large dog, that type of thing, things that are going to derail it first off. And this might sound a little persnickety, but if your loved one has an issue with somebody that's larger or heavy, overweight, you know, things that are going to be a big issue for them that they're not going to be able to get past, that's okay to look at those type of things because what works best in your situation. A lot of times what we like to do for my client, I have one I've been with it for 8 years, just recently, another for 5. And so I've done a lot of interviewing. A lot of times we do a meet and greet, just come over, have them come, when it's good timing, not like when we're doing care, but come later in the afternoon so we can sit and visit, ask what they're looking for, let them know a little bit about you, just do a little talking and getting to know each other, see if they're on time. One thing, if they're late, okay, that's a big point for some people. We have a routine, we like to start at a certain time, but you want flexibility both ways. So if you call them the night before and say, hey, can you come 30 minutes later or 30 minutes earlier? You also want somebody that has some flexibility. That's not going to be like, oh no, if it's my way or the highway, because what if your person had a really rough night and you want to start a little bit later and give them a little bit of time to sleep in? And they're like, oh no, that doesn't work. You have to learn that flexibility between caregiving and the family, but it's important to set good boundaries to begin with about being on time or use of phone. Sometimes we have kids and we might have a kid needing to call and touch base with us. So it's like, okay, I'm in a spot. I'm going to take this call real quick. Child, is this an emergency? Do you need me right this second because I'm at work? And so it's important. I know it's so much different than it was 20 years ago. The instant being able to get a hold of somebody. But we like to do a meet and greet, just do a little visiting, show them around the house. To begin with, I wasn't there for my clients when they did the meet and greets because they could actually handle that themselves. But over time, it almost became easier if I was there. That way I got an idea of the person, and the other thing is what's the wage? What is your minimum that you can, go with that you can afford, or what's our maximum we can pay? Because people want to leave room for small increases or, that type of thing. And you hate saying, oh, this is the right person, this is perfect. And then you can't come and meet in the middle on the wage. So that's definitely an important thing to talk about. After we do the meet and greet, sometimes we'll say right then, well, do you want to start doing training, next Monday and get something scheduled? After that, what we did is do a one-on-one. You just watch my whole shift. I'll do all the work. I'm going to talk through and explain why we do, how we do. Let that person that you're interviewing see what the care is actually, get a hands-on. And we actually did paid training because our time was valuable and that was a big expense, but also, whoever you're interviewing, their time is valuable also. We did offer on-the-job training, and that way, depending on your situation, if your loved one can walk and talk somebody through the whole situation and all their care, that's great. You want the person eventually to know how to do everything and not have to be walked through it.
Yeah.
But it's also important for both people to be comfortable with the routine because, like you said, that fear of safety, and if there's an injury, what can happen and the changes in your person. And so definitely safety is important. But yeah, we started with just watching a whole shift. And then the next time we have them watch and just start doing like, I'll stretch this ankle and you can stretch this ankle. And then they did more and more, and I stepped back and let them do it. And I sit on my hands and zip my lips and try not to walk them through it because we want them to be able to figure out as they went. But it worked really well with us. Then we usually have them do a shift on their own. Then the client would know, or they would know what they needed to work on. If there was any questions, if we need to revisit and do some extra training in an area or not. And then, so it was a slow transition.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's
kind
always
of
good
a
when you're,
phased approach.
yes, when your loved one's there because you have backup. It's not like, oh, I'm here alone with a caregiver that doesn't know what to do. And it worked really, really fairly well. It's always hard to bring in a caregiver because that's such a change in the care and the routine and just the comfort of your person knowing exactly what you want.
Absolutely. And so you were doing this as part of a larger caregiving team, as a kind of caregiver training a new caregiver. But this is
Yes,
something that a family member probably could and should do if you're bringing in a caregiver for the first time.
definitely. Definitely. It was just something I could help take off the husband's plate, the spouse's plate, because I had been there for a little while. And that way we try to train everybody the same way. So it's not like, well, today's Monday, Joe does it this way, but Tuesday, Susie does it this way. Tried to have continuity so it wasn't all different each time a different person was there. And even if it's just somebody coming in for a couple hours in the afternoon when it's not a high care time, but somebody that can be there so the loved one can get away and go to the store or not worry, okay, you're situated, you're fine, but what if there's an emergency and you can't get to the phone or can't get outside if there was a fire? Um, you can slowly start adding in care. But also, if there was an emergency and your loved one had, if the main caregiver had surgery, who will provide the care for your person at home? And that's a scary thought because when you are a 24/7 caregiver for your family member, if something happens, where are they? Who will be there to take care of them? And to be able to plan ahead and already have, someone that knows the routine, even if it starts out one weekend a month, one Saturday a month or one day a month, and, grows from there, it's still a start and it's still someone that's then familiar with your care and your needs.
Absolutely. Do you recommend people hire and train more than one caregiver kind of for that backup reason? Like, do you typically work in a team? Someone has a couple of caregivers, or do you typically see people have one caregiver?
It really depends on the situation. But it is important to have more than one. I could have had one person 6 days a week and then just have one person to fill in for my client. But then if that main person had a health issue in their own family or their own health, then you're scrambling to cover 6 days. So if you have two or three people that all can do, like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Tuesday, Thursday, and break it up a little bit, it is helpful just for the fact of you never know if somebody gets sick, and you don't want your client to get sick, you don't want your loved one to get sick. It's nice to be able to have some extra to fill in. And not everybody, some people have very set schedules caregiving wise. I know, like right now, I have 2 days a week. I have Tuesday, Thursday off. Do I work those days? Yes, there are days I end up covering a shift, but I know Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday afternoons, I'm at a client's. I can't fill in at this other household. Sometimes when you're, taking care of family, that's your only responsibility. And that's great that if that works that way. But as a caregiver, they might have a whole nother set schedule that they work on other days or other shifts for other clients. And so some days people have flexibility and they can fill in. But if Susie isn't available on Tuesday and Thursday, but maybe you have a specialist appointment for yourself and you have no other day to go, you really need someone. So sometimes it's good to have at least two, just depending on the shifts you're filling and your needs, to have a backup for a backup. It sounds redundant, but when crud hits the fan, having a little extra help is sure handy versus going, well, we'll just stay in bed for today and we won't get up and, we'll just shuffle through it and do the best we can. That can happen sometimes and that works, but it's nice to be able to do your full routine and get up and get in your chair, in your recliner or whatever you want to do for the day and get out of the bed and get out of the bedroom and get washed up and brush your teeth. And it's nice to have options and some extra flexibility so that you have a backup.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that brings up an important point about organization. As I hear you talk about schedules and training and days, it sounds like being organized is really important. Do you have kind of tips and tricks for both the caregiver and the client as how to keep this organized? Anything that you use or recommend?
What we do as a caregiver is I'll just get a regular spiral notebook and we just call it a communication book. So we can say what happened in that shift, or if they were tired and sleepy and it took a little bit longer to get around, or if there was a pressure spot and you noticed it and you want to make sure you pass it on for the next person to be aware of. You always want to point that out to the family member or whoever's, you can also tell a client, but you always want to make sure you pass that information along. And so if you write it down, that gives another visual. Sometimes even having like an extra phone, an old phone involved in the care is nice because you can take a picture of that pressure area. And that way the next caregiver can see that, or the family member, they can take it with them when they go to the doctor. They go, this is what this looked like yesterday. And it wasn't there 2 weeks ago. So a communication notebook can be very handy. If the medications are really involved, sometimes a checklist where you initial, each dose that they're given, just so not just visually. If you're using a medicine box, that's super handy also because you can glance at, okay, Monday morning meds have been taken.
Mhm.
It gives you an added visual instead of having to get all the pill boxes out each time or the bottles. It can sometimes consolidate that task. So that's just another way that can be helpful for even a family member is to be able to start with a med box. That got off track, but
But
there's
it's a
so
different
many.
piece of organization. It's
Yes,
important.
even if I have forms, and I think people get annoyed with me sometimes, but especially like the main that your spouse is gonna be out of town and you're not able to travel with them. So you have caregivers doing 24/7 for a week. And if you have a checklist with, okay, yeah, meds were given, the dogs were fed, the trash was taken out, watered the plants, just those little things that maybe the caregivers don't always do because your spouse does that or your mom or your dad do that. But it's nice to have a visual checklist to help make sure those extra things get done. Sometimes we do it daily, morning meds, evening meds, check the bed, make sure the bed's clean. Is the bathrooms clean? Did the meds get given? Bring her mail in. Did we do supper? Did we go get her hot chai tea for the day that she likes? Little checklists like that can be really handy. Also, instead of scrolling through a whole notebook of information and entries, you go, oh, yep, she skipped her meds last night. She didn't want to take them. Or, you can make a note if there was a fall or that type of thing. So it can be a little easier to track some information. And those are so customizable. You can customize them. I have the same form that I've used for multiple clients that I've just customized to what the needs were for that current client. So the communication notebook, and in that, a lot of times we have a list of the medicines. Just because if you have to go to the doctor, instead of grabbing all the bottles, you have a set list that you've just, it's current. In there also, you can have a whole routine and what the client likes or how they like things done. So you don't knock on the front door because the dogs will bark. So, just you walk right on in, you wash your hands. You don't have to do a lot of small talk, but you kind of have a routine written down. So as a new caregiver is starting, they have that they can look back to for reference. You might be able to take a picture and have it printed out that has how you like your propping or your pillows done. And so instead of having to ask, where does this go? If you have a visual picture that you can refer to instead of having to ask each time, because by the end of the day, they might be really tired and groggy and not be able to self-direct that care as they would in the morning. And so you can update the pictures, you can add new ones. And that works really well because as we train someone, we might learn best by reading. Someone else might be seeing or doing. And so if we have a written schedule and routine, some of the exercises, the different things you do, or you want 2 washcloths and 1 hand towel, or no, I want 2 bath towels, for different tasks, you can have that written down and then that can be referred to. And I like to put it in the clear protectors in a 3-ring binder because it changes. I always said I can make a Bible and make it a bound journal type thing, but it's always changing. Just as soon as you have it all figured out, something will change. And that's okay because we can adapt and change. But the 3-ring binder with the clear pouches make it really easy to update and change things. And that can all be kept, in a drawer in the bedroom out of the way. It doesn't have to be posted on the wall where everybody's seeing it, that company or that type of thing. But it's easy to put it away, but also they can take it with them to the doctor, if you're tracking input or output or those type of things. So it makes it, I know there's apps on the phone that you can use, and those are also very handy. But sometimes just old fashioned, because not everybody deals with technology. Everybody uses it differently, but it is nice to be able to have something you can just easily take with you to the doctor to refer to if needed. And that's like with the cell phone for taking pictures. It just makes a way to easily take it to the doctor and show them. Or if you're, tech savvy and you're sending a document or, into the doctor through their app or whatever, you can just attach the picture, that type of thing. Yeah. But the communication notebook definitely can come in handy for tracking, things you see, observing, and that type of thing. It doesn't have to be a big long entry. I tend to make long entries, but it's one of those things. I don't remember what happened last week. And if I need to look back on it and refresh or be able to explain to a doctor or someone what happened or the situation, it's good to have it written down, to be able to look back at it and refer to.
Yeah. And I really like the idea of sitting down and creating the checklists and the daily routines because I think it ensures that the person who's receiving care is getting their needs met. It's a great kind of even introductory activity before you hire a caregiver to say, what things do I want every day, or what things do I like, or what does my husband do that I would want someone to take over that care. And so just the process of creating those things can really help outline what you're looking for in a caregiver and what you need to
Yeah,
kind of set those expectations.
definitely.
Yeah. And I think that's a good segue into communication strategies. Caregiving is such a sensitive topic because most of the time it starts with a family member, and then now you have this outside person coming into, your home, and it's also their place of employment. So, can you talk a little bit about communication strategies, maybe from both perspectives, about how to make it a positive experience?
Definitely. And technology comes into play there too. I had a client that mostly did regular phone calls, and then we have caregivers we start texting, and they're not so used to checking their phones. So if somebody texted at 7 and said, "Hey, I can't come in today, I'm sick," but they're not a big tech person and they don't see that message and they're wondering at 10 o'clock, why isn't so and so here to work? Making sure what the form of communication is. That's definitely a good start, just so there's no confusion. Because even if I say, well, Sarah is my neighbor and she's interested in doing some caregiving, do you want to talk to her and maybe, see if she might be able to help you guys? Well, if Sarah thinks Joe is calling her, but Joe thinks Sarah is calling, well, then they think, well, she doesn't want to work for us, so we don't want her.
Mhm.
Clearly giving both phone numbers so that they each know each other's number and clear, who's calling who, so there's no confusion. That's just off the bat a good way to make sure you know which way you're wanting to communicate. And some people do better with something written down. If you say, "I'm not going to be able to come next Thursday," they might not remember that because they have so many things they're dealing with. Where if you do it over a text or write a little note so you can leave it there with them. Figuring out who's going to keep track of hours. Do they have a desk calendar that they write down the caregiver's hours, and then pay at the end of the week? How often will you be paid? How will you be paid? Is there going to be a 1099 at the end of the year? Or is it just you claim what you're going to claim, and we're not going to send you a 1099 in? Those are important questions from the beginning also, because some people, maybe they're not wanting to make a whole lot, or they're in the in between stage where they're getting their retirement, but they still want to be out helping other people, but they have just a little window of how much they can make. Those it's important to talk about those things at the beginning also. And even if you say, okay, I'm telling my client that I have a health issue or something came up, it's important to tell their spouse or their mom or their dad as well, because they might forget. You can't just assume that one person told the other. And it's not that you're not trusting them, but you're wanting that communication to be clear. And so there aren't any confusion or any mixed feelings or mixed messages where something didn't get communicated clearly. Did that kind of answer?
Yes, it
Okay.
did. And I
Okay.
think one thing to think about is if you're using an agency, there's also going to be rules and regulations and things with agency caregivers to think about when you're talking about communicating or changing schedules or how people are paid. So it's really going to depend on if you're managing that yourself or if you've hired a caregiving agency.
Definitely. And, one thing with an agency, it's kind of hard because a lot of times there's not supposed to be any communication outside of work. So if you're running 5 minutes late, you'd have to call the office and the office would have to let your person know. I know with an agency, there's more oversight. There's someone else keeping an eye on things, but also there's a lot more logistics because they can do this or they can't do that. Like if your family member went out of town and you were going to need more coverage, they might have to do extra training to do medication management, where I get to the point, usually I can help make a list of the meds and help, encourage the family to start using a med box or to let me start helping fill the med box weekly, just to kind of take little bits of things off of their shoulders. And, working together with that over time for trust, because that's something they've done for so long. But just trying to help the family find ways that maybe can save some time or, consolidate some things, ordering those refills automatic versus them having to call in or take the prescription bottle into the pharmacy and ask for their refill.
Mhm. Absolutely. And
um, Go ahead.
I think one question that comes up when people in our community are hiring caregivers for the first time and that, they've never had somebody come into their home before is how can I make this person feel welcome? And how can I make this person feel comfortable in my home? Again, if you use an agency, there might be more kind of rules and regulations, but we've had people ask, should I stock food or snacks for them? Should I stock drinks for them? As a caregiver, what sorts of things help make you feel welcome, or do you like or expect, in your workplace?
Definitely. I always try to come prepared. I lots of times will have my water. I'll have a snack if depending on the length of your shift. If you have medication you need to take for a headache or something, it's good to have a little backup supply of that because I don't depend on my client to have anything for me. Now, if I go to work, something changes and I have to do a long shift, you know, I can get somebody to bring me food or they'll say, yeah, make a sandwich, that type of thing. But I don't rely on them to provide any of those things for me. I always come, I guess, self-contained where I have everything I need for that shift. Now, if it's their birthday and they want to share a piece of birthday cake with you, that's great, and that's just something to communicate from the beginning and what they feel like. Do they want you to put your coat on the coat rack or put it over a chair? Do they want you to take your shoes off? Most likely not if you're working with lifts or equipment, because that can be a hazard also. But just communicating about that to begin with, figuring out if they keep their house warm or cold. I always told caregivers when I did their training, I said, unless you are an ice cube, don't wear a sweater, because we turn the heat up for the comfort of the client as we're getting them washed and dressed and undressed. So, come prepared, but just know it's not going to be cold here. You will never be cold in this house. But also, do you want me to wear scrubs? Is it all right if I wear my everyday clothes? Do you have a preference? Are you sensitive to smells? Do I need to not wear, use a certain, fabric softener sheet? Or I've had some clients that actually I kept a pair of clothes at their house. They washed them in their washer. That way, when I got there, I changed into those. And that way, I might not have used fabric softener or scented laundry soap. But what if my daughter did in the load before or after mine? And then that smell was on my clothes. Some people are more sensitive to things than others. I think one day I went to interview with a client and I had forgotten and I dyed my hair that day before I went, and it wasn't a big deal. It was dry. I went, but later she let me know. I thought that might be it might not have worked for us because of that scent. And I hadn't even thought, something normal like that to me would be dyeing my hair would have been sensitive to someone else. Yeah. So, finding out if, perfumes or scents are an issue. Is another, communication type thing to talk about before you get started. And that's why the in-person meet and greet is important, just because then you're seeing the natural environment or how you normally, get around or act. But yeah, a lot of my jobs, they don't necessarily want me to wear scrubs, and that's all right. Stretchy pants, t-shirts, because you're going to be up and down, you're helping someone and they want you to be comfortable and they want you to be safe and you want to be comfortable as well. Like I said, you don't want to wear a sweater when you're going to be working in a hot environment. And those are just little things you learn over time. And you might have somebody that likes their house super cold, maybe because they're afraid of their electric bill. And so they keep their house really cold. So you might want to always have a sweater or a jacket with you when you go there. But there's so much to learn because like you said, we're coming into your home to help you in your home. It's not my home to reorganize. I'm stepping into your home, and that's something that is a new situation for so many people. If you want to grab a glass of water, if you're coughing, you need water, I'm not going to keep you from the water, but at the same time, I brought my water with me. No, we're good. I'll eat lunch when I leave, depending on the shift. If not, is there a time in there while you're doing your medicine or you're eating your breakfast that I can have a snack? Is that all right if I, stand on the counter next to you and I'm still here and ready to help? But can I have my snack right then if I need to? And so I wouldn't ever say, unless it's a different situation where you're gonna be out of town and you're having 24/7 caregivers, hey, what meals can I make for you? Or if I'm, this sounds good to me, is this something you would like to eat? Especially if you're helping prepare meals. And sometimes that can be something that a caregiver can really help with as well. You're doing some meal prep. little things you're going to find as you go that can be helpful. If you can make a pan of tater tot casserole, and they can put one pan in the freezer for later and have that for the other pan for a meal for the night. The roles can really change as you go. And so it might start out as some companion care or some hands-on caregiving, might then turn to, we have company coming over tomorrow. Can you run the vacuum tomorrow before you leave for your shift?
Yeah.
Or, hey, I can't think of anything to eat. I'm really tired this week. Could you put together a meal for us? And that planning ahead can really be helpful. And like you said, in communication, figuring out what the person needs, how you can help most, and adapting that to the needs of your client. Because the roles really do change as you've been with someone and you figure out what they need and they figure out how you can help. Because someone might not know when they're bringing that first caregiver in. I don't know what I need help with, and can I start a load of laundry, little things like that you can do between care tasks can be a real help, folding that load of laundry or folding the towels and putting them away, emptying the trash because tomorrow's trash day. Those little things can really evolve. And it's not that I'm, as a caregiver, wanting to take over, but I'm also not good at standing around. So how can I do things that help you, in the in between, or even supplies as a communication thing? Hey, I just opened the last box of gloves today. I didn't know if you had it on your list.
Yeah.
Little things like that for communication. And you might have a piece of paper on the fridge or a dry erase board that you can make a note of. They might already have it on the list and they're getting it that day while they're out and about, but you hate to use the last of something. And then the next time you come to work, there's none, and you forgot to tell them that you're almost out or it was getting low. So having a spot you can make those notes, and let them know, hey, we're low on this, can help save them time and stress later with running out of something, because they're used to being the only one working and using that item.
Yeah.
So, your catheter supplies or feeding tubes or different things like that. It's good to have a good communication about when it's coming in or when you use the last one or that type of thing. That can be helpful as well.
Absolutely. What I'm really gathering from our conversation is that the really key things when you're thinking about working with a caregiver and hiring a caregiver is organization and communication. That, it kind of seems to be the theme and all the things we've talked about, is that it's really important to keep those lines of communication open and keep the things that you need organized. Um,
Definitely.
yeah. And with our last few minutes, I want to kind of make a little bit of shift to talk about caregiver self-care. And we can kind of speak to family-based caregivers and paid caregivers, but, I'm not a caregiver myself. And I'd love to hear, ways that you really advocate for caregivers to take care of themselves, because, I've always been told as a parent, you can't fill up somebody else's cup if your cup is empty. And I know caregivers are in that same situation. So what sorts of, recommendations and things do you have for the caregivers that are maybe listening to this podcast?
Definitely. When you have a little one, they always say nap when they nap, because you might know that's your best time, but you're thinking, well, I have laundry and dishes and I need to put something on for supper. Something as important as drinking your water, hydration. It helps with so many things. If you need to get the mail, the quick walk down to get the mail, or a walk around the house, just even 5 or 10 minutes. If you can't get outside because your person is having a rough day, maybe do some squats, walk in place, march in place, movement, purposeful movement, stretching. You're doing their stretches, you're making sure they're exercising, but are you taking care of yourself also? Protein intake is big. Everybody's protein needs vary, but most of us aren't getting the amount of protein we need. Same thing with fiber. But purposeful movement, your water, your fiber, those are so important. It's just, you can pour from an empty cup, but it might not be pretty for anybody. Everybody's going to be stressed and snappy and exhausted and tired. And so, sometimes, you need to talk to your doctor. Sometimes you just might be to the point you need medication. But at the same time, if you support yourself at the gut level, your body can work so much better and have more energy, and just communicate better and just be more of an even keel. The hard doesn't change. All those hard tasks that you deal with every day are always there, but how you handle them and how you work through them and how your body adapts to them is what you can adjust. You can't change the fact that you have all those tasks you need to do in the day for the care for your loved one, but how you care for your own body can translate so much bigger into how you feel yourself, and you have more energy and you're more patient and kind, and then that positive attitude can flow over to your loved one as well.
Yeah, those are all great tips. As we wrap up, can you tell us how to find you on Instagram so we can kind of continue to follow along with your wonderful things that you share for our community?
Yes, it's Caregiver Chronicles PNW for the Pacific Northwest. I kind of cross post everything on Facebook under Illene Kalp as well. Just it's easy to share, and some people have one or the other. And I'm always open to ideas. If somebody has a situation they need help in, post it on the video or send me a message, and I will try to help work through it. There's so much benefit in using the information you can find from even occupational therapist or physical therapist, home care, just the safety in your setting, what works for you and how you can adapt things to do the most safely in your home. And especially social media, there are a lot of different sites that you can see and, look up videos that might be something you're dealing with. But always try to adapt and find ways to help, and share information that might be helpful to someone else that's just getting started in the caregiving journey and hasn't done that before, because people might have a lot of training, but you're also, as a family caregiver, you're learning as you go, and your person the most, and it's so important to advocate for them and for their needs, but also to remember to advocate for yourself through that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your knowledge with us today. And I would just encourage all of our listeners and viewers to check out her Instagram page because she is a wealth of information, has really wonderful videos that we've reshared as well. And again, just thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Melissa.